Hey loves, welcome back to my channel. Today guys, I'll be checking out this interesting video from Thomas Sowell, and it's titled A Worldwide Perspective of Chinese People Insight into Chinese Society. You guys, I'm super excited for this. If you're yet to subscribe to this channel, please consider subscribing. Give this video a massive thumbs up, comment, share, and all that good stuff. And without much ado, let's see what Thomas Sowell has for us in this video.
The overseas Chinese are the largest of the world's middlemen minorities. At the beginning of the 20th century, there were an estimated 7 million Chinese living outside of China.
What?
By mid-century, this had doubled to 14 million, and by 1993, there were an estimated 36 million overseas Chinese. While Chinese communities arose in such far-flung locations as Britain, Peru, New Zealand, and the Caribbean, the chief concentrations of the overseas Chinese have been in the nations of Southeast Asia. The worldwide distribution of the overseas Chinese in 1993 was as follows: Africa, 108,000, Europe, 757,000, Western Hemisphere, 3,802,000, Oceania, 407,000, Asia, 31,054,000.
Wow.
Total, 36,128,000.
That's a whole lot.
The overseas Chinese have often been called the Jews of Asia, but perhaps the Jews might be called the Chinese of the West. The overseas Chinese are not only far more numerous than the Jews, but have also played a far larger economic role in the countries of Southeast Asia than even the considerable economic role of the Jews in Europe and America. The largest conglomerate in Indonesia is controlled by an overseas Chinese businessman, one of a number of ethnically Chinese billionaires in Southeast Asia. Though less than 5% of the Indonesian population, the overseas Chinese have controlled an estimated 70% of the country's private domestic capital and run 3/4 of its 200 largest businesses.
Are you for real?
In Thailand, ethnic Chinese, about 10% of the population, have controlled all 4 of the largest private banks. Altogether, ethnic Chinese living outside of China produced as much wealth as China itself in the early 1990s. Of the 5 billionaires in Indonesia and Thailand in the late 20th century, all were ethnically Chinese. Although this level of prosperity did not occur overnight, there has long been a pattern throughout Southeast Asia of most of the firms and most of the investment in whole industries being in the hands of the Chinese minority, which has been less than 10% of the population of that region. Typically, their enterprises have been family-controlled and family-run, even when they have been giant multinational corporations. The Chinese have also been a numerically small but economically significant factor in a number of Western Hemisphere nations. In the Jamaican capital of Kingston, the Chinese at one time owned most of the grocery stores. They also owned most of the grocery stores in Peru's capital city, Lima, as well as most of the shoe stores, department stores, and hotels in that city. They have had similar success in retail trade in Panama, where most of the towns have had Chinese grocery stores, restaurants, and dry goods stores. Like most middleman minorities, the overseas Chinese have been a predominantly urban people, concentrated especially in the principal metropolises of the nations in which they have settled. In various times and countries, more than half the Chinese population has been concentrated in one city: Bangkok in Thailand, Manila in the Philippines, Lima in Peru, Buenos Aires in Argentina, Saigon in South Vietnam, Vientiane in Laos, and Phnom Penh in Cambodia. Most of the Chinese in Brazil lived either in Sao Paulo or in Rio de Janeiro. Like other minorities, Chinese may all look alike to outsiders, but their internal differences are sharp and enduring, both in China and overseas. Chinese from different parts of China not only speak in ways that are mutually unintelligible, but also operate overseas in different social networks that are often mutually exclusive in both personal and business matters. But, while these networks typically do not include all the Chinese in a given country, they link similar groups of Chinese internationally. Regional networks link the Hokkiens or Yunnanese of Indonesia or Singapore with people of similar ancestral origins in South China who live on the other side of the Pacific. The regional mixture of the overseas Chinese does not match the regional mixture of people in China, nor is this mixture the same in all overseas countries. The primary source of
What are you guys? What are your thoughts on this video? Thomas Sowell has once again totally blew my mind with this narration, because prior to this moment, I never knew that 36 million Chinese live overseas, because this is totally mind-blowing. And the fact that Chinese people are very, very successful wherever they are is very, very astonishing. No wonder they are called the Jews of Asia. Let me know what you guys think about this video in the comment section down below. I'm really having fun reacting to this video, and you guys, let's continue watching.
these Chinese emigration were the two southern provinces of Fujian and Guangdong, which in the 19th century contained only about 10 to 15% of the population of China. Even within these two southern provinces, the origins of people immigrating to particular places has varied considerably. The Cantonese have historically constituted the bulk of Chinese immigrants to the United States, Canada, and Latin America. But in Southeast Asian countries, the Cantonese have been a minority within the Chinese minority. More broadly, the Chinese of Thailand, the Indochina region, and the United States originated mostly in China's Guangdong, now Guangdong province, which contains the city of Canton, now Guangzhou, while the Chinese in the Philippines, Malaysia, and Singapore originated mostly in the province of Fujian. The localization of origins and destinations has sometimes been even more specific. Of all the Chinese who immigrated to the United States before World War I, a majority came from Taishan, just one of 98 districts in Guangdong province. Moreover, the occupations of the overseas Chinese have historically been highly correlated with their respective places of origin in China, and have remained so decades or even generations later. The strong regional ties of the overseas Chinese are also reflected in more than 1,000 regional organizations to which they belong. Overseas Chinese have long been known as joiners, and have more than 8,000 organizations altogether. Almost all overseas Chinese belong to some Chinese organization. Enormous diversity may be concealed in a common label. To speak of China during the Ming Dynasty is to refer to an area 10 times the size of France, and an era longer than the entire history of the United States. To speak of the Chinese language and its dialects, as if we were speaking of English as spoken by the Scots and the Irish, is to ignore profound linguistic differences which made Chinese dialects mutually unintelligible as spoken words, though people educated in written, non-phonetic Chinese characters could communicate on paper in that medium, much as Spaniards and Russians can understand the same written Arabic numerals while pronouncing them in entirely different ways. Although Chinese traders, immigrants, or sojourners have been found in various parts of Southeast Asia for many centuries, large-scale emigration from China is much more recent in history. There were only an estimated 100,000 Chinese living in the region prior to the mass immigration of Chinese laborers in the 19th century. This emigration coincided with turbulent times in China, including famines and wars. The consolidation of European imperialism in Southeast Asia provided security, order, and economic opportunities sorely lacking in the declining Manchu dynasty. One measure of China's travails was an absolute decline in population, from approximately 391 million in 1842 to 307 million by 1885. This was not due to emigration alone, by any means. All 7 million Chinese overseas at the turn of the century would account for only a small fraction of the population decline. What was happening in China was the disintegration of a nation that had a history and a culture that went back thousands of years, and which had once been the leading nation in the world in technology, scholarship, commerce, and organization. China was a nation centuries before Christ. Confucius was born nearly a century before Socrates. Cast iron was produced in China 1,000 years before it was produced in Europe, and the tonnage of cast iron produced in China in 1078 greatly exceeded that produced in England 7 centuries later. Printing existed in China centuries before its first appearance in Europe.
Wow.
Gunpowder likewise originated in China.
Hmm.
Chinese metropolises of more than 2 million people each existed at a time when the largest city in Europe contained no more than 54,000 residents. Commerce, though officially deplored in Confucian philosophy, flourished in China. Economic development in China in the 11th century was at a level reached by no European nation until the 18th century. In the 14th century, China had the most advanced agriculture in the world,
Wow.
and as late as the 16th century, China had the world's highest standard of living. Yet China was not simply overtaken by the later progress of European nations. Internal decline and disintegration appeared in many forms, including technological stagnation under stifling government economic controls, neglect of military defenses, widespread corruption, and eventually a fragmenting of the country as local warlords gained control of particular regions, and foreigners, both Japanese and Europeans, began to prey on a weakened China.
Wow, you guys, what an interesting video. I'm really enjoying every minute of this video. This is so rich and very educating. And from everything I have seen in this video, I can say for a fact that China is the mother of invention, and the way China is so advanced is very surprising. Even back to the early days before civilization, China was already civilized. Let me know what you guys think about this video so far. This is very interesting, and I'm having fun reacting to this video. Leave your thoughts in the comment section, and let's wrap this video up, you guys.
It was from this China that massive emigration began in the 19th century. Although the overseas Chinese have become widely known as a middleman minority, Chinese immigrants seldom began overseas as businessmen. In the era of mass Chinese immigration, most of these immigrants began overseas as coolie laborers, destitute, illiterate, unskilled workers, often in debt for their passage and indentured to whoever paid for it. Early Chinese immigrants almost always began in the lowliest, unskilled tasks, often jobs considered too dirty, difficult, dangerous, or menial for the local peoples to accept. The different rates at which individual Chinese rose from such occupations contributed to the economic diversity of the overseas Chinese communities. As with the Jews, the more successful Chinese provided the stereotypes which the larger society associated with the group as a whole, even when Chinese peddlers and small shopkeepers outnumbered commercial giants, and Chinese laborers outnumbered them all. Overall, however, the overseas Chinese as a group have usually averaged considerably higher incomes than the surrounding populations of the countries in which they lived. As of 1969, for example, Chinese American families earned 12% higher incomes than the average American family, and in less developed countries the differences have usually been far greater. In Malaysia, the Chinese have usually averaged about double the income of the Malays, and in Jamaica, more than double the income of the average Jamaican. This did not mean that the overseas Chinese were rich, especially not in third world countries, where general economic levels have been low. It was once a common practice for those who succeeded overseas to return to China to spend their old age. However, post-World War II political developments, and especially the takeover of China itself by the Communists, sharply reduced the repatriation of overseas Chinese to the homeland and made them more of a permanent part of the societies in which they lived. Because Chinese immigrations to many nations began as virtually all-male immigrations, many have throughout history married with local women, producing mixed offspring who have become culturally Chinese in some places and times, and culturally assimilated into the larger society in other places and times. Some Chinese families have remained culturally Chinese for generations, whether or not they remained biologically pure Chinese. Sometimes the same individual would present himself as a member of the indigenous culture and society when dealing with indigenous customers, and as Chinese when dealing with other Chinese businessmen. Many Chinese never became citizens of the countries in which they lived, though their families remained there for generations. Others did become citizens, especially after World War II, and particularly after the communist victory in China made their return highly unlikely. In recent years, the very phrase overseas Chinese has been challenged as obsolete, insofar as it connotes people temporarily absent from China. Such wide diversities in social reality have been reflected in huge disparities in statistics on the number of Chinese in various countries. A 1936 census in Indochina, for example, listed 326,000 Chinese, but an independent scholar put the figure at more than 1 million. Much depends on whether one counts as Chinese only Chinese nationals or includes people of Chinese ancestry who hold citizenship in the local country, or whose citizenship is in doubt, or whether one counts as Chinese only those who consider themselves Chinese, omitting others of the same racial mixture who consider themselves Thais, Burmese, or Filipino, for example. Australian census statistics on the Chinese, for example, refer to persons born in China, even though these are, 1, a minority of the ethnically Chinese in Australia, and 2, include many white Russians who were born in China. Our definition of the overseas Chinese will be based on those who are ethnically Chinese, regardless of citizenship or nativity. Racial mixtures also complicate the count of Chinese. In some cases, the part Chinese may be not only estranged from the Chinese community, but even hostile to it. In some countries of Southeast Asia, part Chinese politicians have spearheaded anti-Chinese movements. This parallels the situation among Spanish Jews, whose 15th century expulsion from Spain was partly the work of Jewish converts to Christianity. Although it may seem paradoxical that the Chinese generally prosper in other countries, where they have historically been subjected to both sweeping discrimination and sporadic mob violence, but remain very poor in China, that is nevertheless the case. Per capita income in China in the late 20th century was less than half that of Taiwan, and less than 1/7 that of Singapore, to compare it only with other Chinese states in the area. On the world scene, China remained one of the poorest nations, after having once been the richest.
Wow, you guys, that was such an interesting video from Thomas Sowell. I really enjoyed every minute of this video. It was an eye-opener, learning what I didn't even know about before. This was so rich, and I love how Thomas Sowell gives us information for free. Let me know what you guys think about this video in the comment section down below. I really enjoyed every minute of this video, and I believe you guys also enjoyed watching. If you did enjoy watching, give this video a massive thumbs up, comment, share, and all that good stuff. And I'll see you all in my next video. Bye guys.